Part 1. The town that locked its doors before dark. The sheriff found the front door wide open at 3:14 a.m. The coffee on the kitchen table was still warm, but the Walker family was gone, and every mirror in the house had been turned toward the wall. Before we begin, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Tonight's stories are all about isolated towns with secrets people were never supposed to uncover. And trust me, some places should stay forgotten. Marlow, Kansas had a population of just under 900 people. One gas station, one church, one diner that closed at 6 sharp every evening, and one rule everyone followed without question: never go outside after the second siren. No one explained why. Outsiders laughed at it. Teenagers whispered about it behind the football field. But every single night at exactly 9:30 p.m., an old rusted siren mounted above the fire station screamed through the town. The first siren was a warning. The second one meant lock your doors. Ethan Cole moved to Marlow after his uncle passed away and left him an old farmhouse near the woods. He was 28, broke, and desperate for a fresh start after getting fired from his construction job in Chicago. At first, the town seemed normal. Quiet but normal. The people smiled too much, though. And every conversation seemed to end abruptly whenever Ethan asked about the woods north of town. Especially the area locals called Hollow Creek. You stay away from there after dark, the diner waitress told him during his second week. Why? She froze while refilling his coffee. Then she forced a smile. Coyotes. Ethan noticed something else too. Nobody in Marlow stayed outside late. At 9:25 p.m., the streets emptied like someone had flipped a switch. Porch lights shut off. Curtains closed. Cars disappeared into garages. And then the siren came. The sound was awful. Not loud. Worse. It sounded old. Broken. Like metal screaming underwater. The first time Ethan heard it, chills spread through his chest. Then came the second siren 5 minutes later. Longer. Closer somehow. That night, Ethan stood by his living room window watching the empty road outside. Nothing happened. No monsters. No coyotes. Just silence. He laughed at himself and went to bed. 3 nights later, he woke up at 2:11 a.m. to knocking. 3 slow taps against his front door. Ethan grabbed the baseball bat beside his bed and checked the window. Nobody. The knocking came again. Tap, tap, tap. He opened the door. The porch was empty except for muddy footprints leading down the stairs into darkness. Bare footprints. Human. He should have closed the door. Instead, he followed them. The trail crossed the road and disappeared near the tree line bordering Hollow Creek. The woods looked wrong at night. Too dark. Even with moonlight, the trees seemed to absorb everything around them. Ethan heard movement deeper inside. Branches cracking. Then whispering. At first he thought it was wind. But the whispers sounded like voices trying to speak through water. Dozens of them. His stomach tightened. He stepped backward and saw someone standing between the trees. A woman. Tall. Thin. Wearing a white nightgown covered in dirt. Her head tilted unnaturally to one side. Ethan called out, "Hey, are you okay?" The woman didn't move. Then he realized something horrifying. She wasn't breathing. Not even slightly. And her feet weren't touching the ground. Ethan stumbled backward so fast he nearly fell. The woman's mouth slowly opened wider and wider until it looked physically impossible. Then the second siren screamed across town. The woman vanished instantly. Not ran. Not stepped away. Gone. Ethan sprinted back home and locked every door. The next morning, he drove into town searching for answers. Nobody would talk. Not the waitress. Not the cashier. Not even Sheriff Briggs. But when Ethan mentioned the woman in white, the sheriff's face lost all color. "You saw her near Hollow Creek?" "Yes." Briggs stared at him for several seconds. Then quietly said something Ethan never forgot. "She usually doesn't let people come back." That afternoon, Ethan searched through old newspaper records at the town library. Most articles were missing. Entire years ripped out. But one photograph remained tucked inside a damaged folder from 1987. It showed a search party standing near Hollow Creek. Behind them, barely visible between the trees, was the same woman in white. Watching. Ethan flipped the photo over. Written on the back in faded ink were 4 words. "She only appears hungry." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. At exactly 9:30 p.m., the first siren echoed through town. Then the second. He checked every lock twice before sitting in silence beside the window. Hours passed. Nothing moved outside. Until 1:47 a.m. A figure slowly walked down the middle of the road toward his house. Not the woman. This was a man, tall, wearing old overalls, dragging something heavy behind him. Ethan squinted through the darkness. It was a body. The man stopped directly beneath Ethan's porch light, then slowly looked up at the window. His face had no eyes, only smooth skin stretched across empty sockets. And then Ethan heard it. Not outside, inside the house. 3 soft knocks, directly behind him. End of part 1. Part 2, the thing inside the house. Ethan froze. The knocking came again. 3 slow taps from somewhere behind him inside the farmhouse. Tap, tap, tap. Every muscle in his body locked. The eyeless man outside still stood beneath the porch light, motionless, his head tilted upward toward the window. But whatever had knocked was inside. Ethan tightened his grip around the baseball bat and slowly turned around. The living room was empty, dark, silent. The old wooden floor creaked softly beneath his feet as he backed away from the window. Another sound drifted through the house. A wet, dragging noise, coming from the hallway. Ethan's breathing became shallow. Who's there? No answer. The dragging sound stopped instantly. Then came whispering. Not one voice, several. Soft, overlapping murmurs spreading through the walls like water moving through pipes. Ethan couldn't understand the words, except for one sentence repeated again and again. Don't let it see you. The hallway light suddenly flickered on by itself. At the far end of the corridor stood the woman from Hollow Creek. Only now Ethan could see her clearly. Her skin looked gray and swollen like something pulled from deep water. Dirt covered her bare feet. Long strands of wet black hair hung over her face, and her neck, bent too far to the side. She twitched violently once, then sprinted toward him. Not running. Wrong. Her body jerked unnaturally fast, limbs snapping at impossible angles as she charged down the hallway. Ethan swung the bat wildly and stumbled backward into the kitchen. The woman slammed into the wall where he'd been standing less than a second earlier. The entire house shook. Ethan bolted for the back door, fumbling with the lock while hearing rapid footsteps behind him. The whispers became louder. Look away. Don't let her speak. Run. The lock finally clicked open. Ethan burst outside into freezing night air and ran toward the barn behind the farmhouse. The second siren suddenly echoed through town. The woman stopped chasing him instantly. Ethan looked back just in time to see her standing motionless in the kitchen doorway, watching him, then slowly smiling. Her mouth stretched impossibly wide again, and from deep inside her throat came another voice. A man's voice. You open the door. The porch light exploded. Darkness swallowed the farmhouse. Ethan spent the rest of the night hiding inside the barn with an old hunting rifle he found hanging on the wall. He didn't sleep. Every hour he heard movement circling outside. Footsteps in the dirt, scratching against the wooden walls. Sometimes whispering directly beside his ear even though nobody was there. Just before sunrise, everything stopped. Completely. The silence felt even worse. When morning finally came, Ethan cautiously returned to the house. The kitchen looked normal again. No broken walls. No footprints. Nothing. Except for muddy water pooled across the floor leading toward the basement door. Ethan stared at it. The basement had been locked since he moved in. His uncle had specifically warned him never to open it. At the time, Ethan assumed it was because of black mold or structural damage. Now he wasn't so sure. He grabbed a flashlight from the garage and approached the basement slowly. The padlock hanging from the door was rusted, but broken. Something had snapped it from the inside. The smell hit him first. Rot. Standing water. And something metallic underneath it. Blood. Ethan forced himself down the stairs. The basement was colder than the rest of the house. Much colder. Concrete walls dripped with moisture. Old shelves lined the room, covered in dusty jars and hunting equipment. Then his flashlight landed on photographs taped across the far wall. Hundreds of them. Every photo showed missing people from Marlow. Families. Travelers. Teenagers. Some photos dated back decades. Others looked recent. Very recent. At the center of the wall was a map of Hollow Creek covered in handwritten notes. One sentence had been circled repeatedly in red ink. They come when someone invites them. Ethan's stomach dropped. Then he noticed another detail. Several photographs had red X marks drawn through the faces. But one picture remained untouched. A photograph of Ethan himself unloading boxes outside the farmhouse 2 weeks earlier. Someone had been watching him since the day he arrived. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Ethan turned off the flashlight instantly. Heavy footsteps moved slowly through the house above him. Then came dragging. The same wet dragging sound from the night before. Ethan held his breath. The footsteps stopped directly above the basement stairs. Silence. Then, a voice. Sheriff Briggs. Ethan? Relief flooded through him. He hurried upstairs. Briggs stood inside the kitchen holding a shotgun. But something about him looked wrong. His uniform was filthy. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes. And his hands trembled badly. "You need to leave town," Briggs whispered. "What the hell is happening here?" The sheriff locked the front door before answering. 30 years ago, something came out of Hollow Creek. People started disappearing. We thought it was one thing at first. He looked toward the hallway nervously. "But it learns." Ethan told him about the woman. The eyeless man. The knocking. Briggs listened silently. Then his face hardened. "You let it inside." Ethan's blood ran cold. "I didn't mean." "It doesn't matter." The sheriff stepped closer. "When you opened that front door the first night, it marked you." A loud bang suddenly echoed upstairs. Both men froze. Another bang followed. From the second floor. Slow footsteps creaked above them. Briggs raised the shotgun. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "It knows I told you." Then something upstairs began laughing. Not human laughter. Too deep. Too many voices layered together. And then Ethan heard furniture sliding across the ceiling directly above them. Like something enormous was crawling upside down. End of part 2. Part 3, the church beneath Hollow Creek. The laughter above them stopped all at once. Sheriff Briggs slowly raised one shaking finger to his lips. The farmhouse became silent again. Too silent. Then came a slow scraping sound across the ceiling. Like fingernails dragging through wood. Ethan tightened his grip on the baseball bat while Briggs aimed the shotgun toward the stairs. Another scrape. Closer this time. Directly above them. The ceiling groaned softly under heavy weight. Whatever was upstairs was massive. Briggs whispered without taking his eyes off the ceiling. "We move now." They backed toward the kitchen door carefully. The sheriff grabbed Ethan's arm before they stepped outside. "Do not look at it if you hear your name." "What?" "You hear me call your name tonight, you ignore it unless you see me." Ethan stared at him. "What the hell does that mean?" Briggs didn't answer. A loud thud exploded upstairs. Both men ran. They burst out the back door just as every light inside the farmhouse suddenly turned on at once. Through the upstairs window, Ethan saw movement behind the curtains. Several tall figures standing unnaturally still, watching them leave. The sheriff shoved Ethan into his truck and sped down the empty road toward town. Nobody was outside. No cars. No lights. Marlow looked abandoned. Even the diner sat dark and lifeless. Briggs drove with both hands locked tightly around the wheel. "They don't come this far into town often," he muttered. "They." The sheriff swallowed hard. "We stopped calling them people years ago." Ethan stared out the window. "What are they?" Briggs hesitated. "Hungry." The truck suddenly radioed with loud static. Then a voice came through. A woman crying. "Please, help me." Ethan froze. It sounded exactly like his mother. Impossible. His mother died 3 years ago. The crying continued through the radio speakers. "Ethan, please?" Briggs instantly grabbed the radio and ripped the wires out. The voice cut off mid-sentence. Ethan stared at him in horror. "That was my mom." "No," Briggs said sharply. "It wasn't." The sheriff's breathing became heavier. "It learns voices first." The truck reached the center of town and stopped outside an old brick church near the cemetery. The building looked ancient compared to everything else in Marlow. Its tall wooden doors were covered in deep scratch marks. Several iron chains wrapped around the handles. Briggs unlocked them carefully. "You're staying here tonight." Ethan looked up at the church uneasily. "You seriously think this place is safer?" "No," Briggs answered quietly. "But they hate this ground." Inside, the church smelled like dust and candle wax. Rows of old wooden pews stretched toward a massive cross near the altar. But something immediately felt wrong. Every stained glass window had been painted black from the inside. No moonlight entered. Briggs locked the doors behind them. Then Ethan noticed the people. At least 20 townsfolk sat silently inside the church. Nobody spoke. Nobody even looked at him. They simply sat with exhausted expressions, clutching hunting rifles and flashlights. A little old woman near the altar quietly whispered prayers over and over. Ethan recognized the diner waitress sitting nearby. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "You should have left town," she whispered. Briggs walked toward the altar and opened a hidden trapdoor beneath a rug. Cold air drifted upward from underground. Ethan frowned. What is that? The sheriff grabbed a lantern. The real church. The underground tunnel beneath the chapel descended far deeper than Ethan expected. Stone walls replaced wood after several minutes. Then the tunnel opened into a massive chamber beneath the town. Ethan stopped walking. The underground room looked ancient. Dozens of candles illuminated old stone pillars covered in strange symbols carved deep into the surface. And at the center stood a gigantic iron door chained shut with thick rusted locks. Something on the other side slammed against it. What? Art? The entire chamber shook. Ethan stumbled backward. What the hell is behind that door? Nobody answered. Another slam echoed through the chamber. Then came whispering. Thousands of whispers. All speaking at once behind the iron door. Ethan covered his ears. The voices sounded wrong. Some were deep. Some were childlike. Some sounded inhuman altogether. But mixed within them were familiar voices. Friends. Family. People Ethan once knew. Calling his name. The sheriff stepped beside him. That door leads into the tunnels beneath Hollow Creek. Another violent impact hit the iron door. Dust rained from the ceiling. The town sealed it in 1989. Briggs looked pale. We thought it was one creature at first. Another slam. One of the locks bent outward slightly. But it spreads. Ethan stared at the door in horror. What happens if that thing gets out? Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then the old woman near the candles quietly answered. It already did. At that exact moment, every candle in the underground chamber went out simultaneously. Darkness swallowed the room. People panicked instantly. Flashlights flickered on. The iron door began rattling violently. Something enormous slammed against it again and again. The chains stretched tighter with each impact. Then a voice echoed through the darkness. Sheriff Briggs' voice. Ethan, help me. Ethan turned immediately toward the sound. But Briggs was still standing beside him, which meant the voice came from somewhere else. Then dozens of identical voices whispered together from the darkness surrounding them. Ethan. 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 One flashlight beam suddenly landed on the ceiling. People screamed. Something huge was crawling upside down above them. Long pale limbs moved spider-like across the stone ceiling while dozens of human faces twisted across its body. All smiling. And every single face was staring directly at Ethan. End of part 3. Part 4. The faces in the ceiling. The thing moved impossibly fast. 1 second it clung to the ceiling above them. The next, it vanished into darkness. People screamed throughout the underground chamber as flashlight beams shook wildly across the stone walls. Don't run, Sheriff Briggs shouted. But panic had already taken over. A man near the back bolted toward the tunnel stairs. He only made it halfway. Something long and pale dropped from the ceiling directly onto him. The man's scream echoed through the chamber for barely 2 seconds before cutting off with a wet cracking sound. Flashlights swung upward. Ethan saw glimpses of limbs dragging the man across the ceiling like a spider carrying prey. And then he heard it. Bones snapping, followed by chewing. The old woman near the candles began sobbing prayers under her breath. Several townspeople aimed rifles upward nervously. Briggs grabbed Ethan's shoulder hard. Listen to me carefully. If the lights go out again, you keep your eyes closed no matter what you hear. What I asked that thing? The sheriff's face looked hollow. We call it the choir. Another scream erupted deeper inside the chamber. Gunshots exploded. 3 rapid blasts echoed off the stone walls. Then silence. The smell hit seconds later. Fresh blood. Ethan's flashlight trembled as he scanned the darkness overhead. The ceiling seemed empty now. Too empty. The sheriff slowly backed toward the massive chain door at the center of the chamber. That thing mimics voices, Briggs whispered. But the faces... His voice cracked slightly. The faces are real. Ethan felt cold spread through his chest. What do you mean real? Briggs looked at him. It keeps pieces. A loud metallic snap interrupted him. One of the iron chains across the underground door had broken. Everyone froze. Another slam shook the chamber. The remaining chains stretched tighter. The whispers behind the door became deafening. Thousands of voices layered together in pain, rage, and hunger. Then Ethan heard a familiar voice again. His mother. Soft, gentle. Ethan, sweetheart. His breath caught instantly. The voice sounded perfect. Exactly like her. Mom? Sheriff Briggs grabbed him violently. That's not her. But Ethan barely heard him. The voice continued from behind the iron door. I'm cold. A second voice joined it. His uncle. Then another. old friends, people Ethan hadn't heard in years. The whispers twisted together into something almost hypnotic. Open the door. Please. Help us. Ethan slowly stepped forward without realizing it. The chains rattled harder. The door vibrated violently. Ethan! Briggs yelled. Ethan snapped back to reality just as his hand touched one of the locks. Ice-cold pain shot through his fingers instantly. He stumbled backward, gasping. The metal lock had left a dark burn mark across his skin, and beneath the skin, something moved, like worms crawling under his veins. Ethan stared in horror. What did it do to me? Briggs looked terrified. Before he could answer, every flashlight in the chamber flickered at once, then died. Total darkness swallowed them. People panicked instantly. Somebody screamed. Another person started crying. Then came footsteps. Not one set, dozens, moving slowly through the darkness around them. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut immediately. The whispers returned. Closer now. Breathing brushed against his ear. A voice whispered beside him. Look at me. Ethan kept his eyes closed. The breathing moved to the other side of his face. Then another voice spoke. Sheriff Briggs. Ethan, open your eyes. But Ethan remembered the warning. Unless you see me. He stayed still. The breathing became heavier. What? Almost excited. Then something touched his forehead gently. Cold fingers. Another voice whispered this time. The diner waitress. You left the upstairs window open. Ethan nearly opened his eyes from instinct. Then he realized something horrifying. He had never told anyone about the upstairs window. The thing knew. A gunshot exploded nearby. Bright light flashed briefly across the chamber. For half a second Ethan saw it standing inches away from him. The choir. Its body looked stitched together from dozens of human torsos fused into one towering shape. Arms bent backward from impossible angles. Faces moved beneath its skin like trapped people trying to escape. And at the center of the creature was the woman from Hollow Creek, still smiling. The darkness returned instantly. People started dying. Screams erupted across the chamber as the creature moved through the dark at terrifying speed. Bones cracked. Something heavy slammed into stone walls. One man begged for help before his voice suddenly transformed into horrible choking sounds. Briggs grabbed Ethan and dragged him toward the tunnel. Move! They sprinted blindly through darkness while chaos erupted behind them. Ethan heard the old woman praying louder and louder until her voice abruptly stopped mid-sentence. Then silence. Not normal silence. Satisfied silence. The sheriff shoved Ethan into a narrow side passage beneath the church. Hurry! The tunnel twisted sharply underground. Behind them came slow footsteps. Not running. Walking. Deliberate. The creature no longer sounded rushed. It sounded patient. Like it knew they couldn't escape. Ethan's lungs burned as they ran deeper underground. Finally, they reached a rusted steel door at the end of the tunnel. Briggs slammed it shut behind them and locked it. The footsteps outside stopped immediately. Then came knocking. 3 slow taps against the metal door. Ethan backed away in terror. The sheriff stared at the door silently. Then Ethan noticed something that made his blood freeze. Briggs' neck was bent slightly sideways now, at the exact same unnatural angle as the woman from Hollow Creek. And slowly, almost painfully, the sheriff began to smile. End of Part 4. Part 5. The Tunnel of Missing People. Ethan slowly backed away from Sheriff Briggs. The steel room beneath the church suddenly felt much smaller. The sheriff stood motionless beside the locked door, head tilted unnaturally to one side, smiling wider with every second. The knocking continued behind the steel door. 3 patient knocks. Exactly the same as the first night at Ethan's farmhouse. Briggs' eyes never blinked. Then he spoke. But the voice wasn't fully his anymore. You shouldn't have come to Marlow. Ethan tightened his grip around the baseball bat. What happened to you? The sheriff twitched violently. For a brief second, his expression returned to normal. Terrified. Run, Briggs whispered weakly. Then his body jerked again. Bones cracked loudly beneath his skin. Ethan stumbled backward in horror as Briggs' spine bent sharply. His arms stretched unnaturally long, fingers twitching like spider legs. The sheriff screamed. Not from rage. But something inside him was changing. It's inside my head, Briggs suddenly shouted. The lights overhead flickered red. Behind the steel door, the whispers grew louder. Ethan looked around desperately for another exit. There, at the far side of the room, a narrow tunnel disappearing deeper underground. Briggs noticed him looking, and smiled again, this time with too many teeth. "You can't leave," the distorted voice said softly. "It already knows your face." Then the sheriff charged. Ethan barely dodged in time as Briggs slammed against the wall hard enough to dent the metal behind him. The sheriff moved wrong now, fast, jerking violently like the woman from Hollow Creek. Ethan swung the bat as Briggs lunged again. Crack. The bat connected with the sheriff's shoulder. Briggs collapsed briefly, screaming in agony. And from beneath his skin, something moved. Dozens of small shifting bulges crawling beneath his neck and jawline. Ethan dropped the bat in horror. Briggs looked up at him with tears in his eyes. "Please," he whispered normally for one brief second. "Don't let them take me." Then his face split into that horrible smile again. Ethan ran. He sprinted into the narrow underground tunnel just as Briggs slammed into the wall behind him with an inhuman roar. The tunnel stretched endlessly beneath Hollow Creek. Old pipes lined the ceiling. Water dripped constantly from cracked stone walls. And everywhere Ethan looked, there were markings. Names scratched into the walls. Dates. Messages. "Help US. It wears our voices. Don't sleep." One message appeared repeatedly every few feet. "It hates the bells." Ethan kept moving. Behind him came distant scraping sounds through the tunnel. Briggs was following him. Or whatever Briggs had become. The air grew colder as Ethan descended deeper underground. Then he heard music. Faint at first. An old church hymn echoing softly somewhere ahead. Ethan slowed carefully. The tunnel eventually opened into a massive underground cavern. And Ethan immediately wished it hadn't. Hundreds of candles illuminated the cavern walls. At first he thought the shapes hanging from the ceiling were roots. Then one of them moved. Bodies. Dozens of them suspended upside down in thick black strands hanging from above like cocoons. Some looked fresh. Others looked decades old. Their mouths hung open silently. Eyes missing. Skin pale gray. Ethan nearly vomited. Then he noticed movement among them. Some were still alive. Barely. Weak twitching fingers. Tiny head movements. The hymn continued softly through the cavern. A woman stood near the center of the room facing away from him. The woman from Hollow Creek. She slowly turned her head toward Ethan. That impossible smile remained stretched across her face. "You came farther than most," she whispered. Her voice sounded layered now. Several people speaking together from the same mouth. Ethan backed away slowly. "What are you?" The woman tilted her head farther sideways until bones cracked loudly. "We were hungry." The hanging bodies above them began twitching violently. The woman stepped closer. "Then it found us." Ethan's breathing became shallow. "What found you?" The candles suddenly flickered hard. Every hanging corpse above them turned their heads simultaneously toward Ethan and answered together. "The well." A deafening roar echoed somewhere deep beneath the cavern floor. The ground trembled violently. Dust fell from the ceiling. The woman smiled wider. "You opened the door upstairs," she whispered. "Now it can smell you." The black strands hanging from the ceiling suddenly tightened around the bodies. Bones cracked throughout the cavern as dozens of corpses jerked unnaturally. Then Ethan saw one of them open its eyes. A teenage boy suspended near the wall stared directly at him and mouthed 3 words silently. "Behind." Ethan turned instantly. Sheriff Briggs stood at the tunnel entrance. Except he barely looked human anymore. His jaw hung unnaturally loose. One arm bent backward. Dark veins pulsed beneath stretched skin. And surrounding him in the tunnel darkness were more figures. The eyeless man. The diner waitress. Several townspeople Ethan recognized. All smiling. All twisted. Briggs took one slow step forward. Then another. "We tried to starve it," he whispered in overlapping voices. "But then you arrived." The cavern floor suddenly cracked open beneath the candles. A deep hollow sound echoed upward from the darkness below, like something enormous breathing underground. And from the black pit beneath Hollow Creek, something breathed Ethan's name back. Ethan. End of Part 5. Part 6. The Thing Beneath the Well. Ethan. The voice from the pit vibrated through the cavern floor. Not loud, yet somehow impossible to ignore. The crack in the ground widened slowly beneath the candles, releasing freezing air that smelled like wet soil and decay. Sheriff Briggs and the others stopped moving. Every twisted figure in the cavern lowered their heads toward the pit like worshippers before an altar. Even the woman from Hollow Creek stepped backward carefully. For the first time since Ethan met her, she looked afraid. Another breath rose from the darkness below. The hanging bodies above the cavern began twitching violently again. Then all at once, every corpse opened its mouth and screamed. The sound was unbearable. Ethan dropped to one knee, covering his ears as the cavern echoed with hundreds of distorted voices crying out together. Briggs whispered softly through the chaos. "It's waking up." The ground cracked harder. A massive chunk of stone collapsed into the pit below. But Ethan never heard it hit bottom. There was no bottom. Only darkness. Moving darkness. The woman suddenly grabbed Ethan's wrist with icy fingers. "You need to leave now." Ethan stared at her in shock. "Aren't you one of them?" Her expression twitched strangely. For a brief second, the horrible smile faded, and Ethan saw something human underneath. "We all are eventually." A loud wet crunch echoed behind them. Briggs' body suddenly bent backward violently. His spine snapped with a sickening crack as something beneath his skin pushed outward. Dark veins spread across his face like roots. Then his mouth opened impossibly wide. Black liquid poured from his throat onto the cavern floor. The other townspeople began changing too. Bones cracking, limbs stretching, faces twitching unnaturally. The pit was affecting them. The woman looked horrified. "It's too close." Ethan pulled away from her. "What is down there?" Before she could answer, the cavern walls began shaking violently. The hymn returned, but now it came from below. Thousands of voices singing together deep inside the darkness. A massive shape shifted beneath the crack in the earth. Far too large to fully see. Ethan only caught pieces of it. Something pale, long, moving slowly beneath the opening like an enormous creature turning in its sleep. Then he saw an eye open in the darkness below. Huge, human-looking, and staring directly at him. Ethan stumbled backward in terror. The eye blinked once. Then every lantern and candle in the cavern exploded simultaneously. Darkness swallowed everything. People screamed instantly. The transformed townsfolk began attacking each other blindly in panic. Ethan heard bones tearing, wet chewing sounds. The cavern had become chaos. Then a hand grabbed Ethan's shoulder. The woman. "This way." She dragged him toward a narrow tunnel near the far wall while screams echoed behind them. As they ran, Ethan glanced back once. Big mistake. Something enormous was pulling itself upward from the pit. Not fully, just part of it. Long pale limbs unfolded slowly from the darkness below. Each limb looked stitched together from dozens of human arms fused into one gigantic structure. Faces moved beneath the flesh. Hundreds of faces, all whispering, all suffering. And at the center of the mass, that massive eye remained fixed on Ethan. The woman shoved him into the tunnel. "Don't look at it." Ethan ran. The tunnel sloped upward sharply beneath Hollow Creek. Behind them came sounds of collapsing stone and distant screaming. The creature was rising. The woman moved quickly despite her twisted body. "You still haven't changed fully," Ethan gasped while running. "Why?" She didn't answer immediately, then quietly said, "Because it hasn't finished eating me yet." The tunnel eventually opened into an abandoned storm drain outside town. Cold night air hit Ethan's face. They emerged near the edge of Hollow Creek Forest beneath a cloudy sky. For the first time in hours, Ethan could breathe properly. Then the second siren suddenly echoed through Marlow. The woman froze instantly. Her face twisted in pain. "No," she whispered. The siren continued screaming across town. And somewhere beneath the earth, something answered it. A roar exploded from underground so violently that trees shook around them. The ground beneath Hollow Creek began sinking. Ethan watched in horror as sections of forest slowly collapsed inward like the earth itself was rotting underneath. Lights throughout Marlow flickered wildly in the distance. The woman grabbed Ethan's jacket hard. "You need the bell." "What bell?" "The church bell." Her voice trembled now. "It trapped the well once before." Another underground roar shook the forest. Then Ethan noticed movement between the trees surrounding them. Figures, dozens of them, standing silently in the woods, watching. More townspeople, but no longer human. Their heads tilted unnaturally while smiles stretched across pale faces. The eyeless man stepped forward first, then spoke in several voices at once. "It knows your name now." The forest behind them suddenly erupted with cracking branches. Something massive was moving beneath the trees, coming closer, fast. The woman backed away from Ethan slowly. Fear filled her expression. "You have to run before it reaches the surface." "What about you?" For the first time she almost looked sad. Then she whispered something horrifying. "I died here in 1989. The ground behind the trees suddenly exploded upward. A gigantic pale limb burst from beneath the earth, tearing through roots and stone as the creature finally began pulling itself into the world above. And every twisted person in the forest smiled wider as they all whispered together. It's finally hungry again. End of Part 6. Part 7, The Bell Tower. The creature erupted from Hollow Creek with a sound Ethan would never forget. Not a roar. A chorus. Thousands of overlapping screams exploding from beneath the earth as gigantic pale limbs dragged themselves upward through collapsing trees and broken ground. The forest shook violently. Twisted townspeople dropped to their knees around Ethan like worshippers, smiling, whispering, crying. It's awake. The woman from Hollow Creek shoved Ethan backward hard. Run. Ethan finally moved. He sprinted through the forest toward town while branches snapped behind him like gunshots. The ground trembled with every movement of the thing crawling out beneath Hollow Creek. Ethan didn't dare look back again. He already knew whatever was emerging wasn't fully human anymore. Maybe it never had been. The streets of Marlow were chaos when Ethan reached town. Power lines sparked overhead. Windows shattered across empty buildings. Sirens screamed continuously now instead of stopping after the second warning. The sound hurt. Deep inside Ethan's skull, something pulsed painfully beneath the burn mark on his hand. The thing behind the door had marked him, and now it was getting stronger. A distorted voice suddenly echoed from nearby speakers mounted across town. Sheriff Briggs. Except it wasn't Briggs anymore. Bring him to the bell. Laughter followed. Dozens of layered voices laughing together. Ethan ran toward the church anyway, because he had no other choice. The old brick church stood at the center of town beneath flashing lights and dark storm clouds. Its bell tower rose above every building in Marlow, and for the first time Ethan noticed something strange about it. The tower leaned slightly away from Hollow Creek, like the entire structure had been pushed. The front church doors stood open. Inside, the pews were empty now. Blood covered parts of the floor. Several deep claw marks stretched across the walls toward the altar. Ethan grabbed a flashlight near the entrance and hurried toward the staircase leading up the bell tower. Halfway up, the church doors slammed shut below him. Then came footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Multiple people entering together. Ethan killed the flashlight instantly. Voices echoed through the church beneath him. You can't ring it alone. The well hears everything now. Come downstairs. The voices kept changing. Sometimes Briggs. Sometimes the waitress. Sometimes Ethan's mother. He continued climbing. The wooden staircase creaked beneath every step as the storm outside intensified. Thunder shook the tower. Then Ethan heard movement above him too. Something crawling overhead inside the walls. Fast. The bell tower suddenly felt trapped. Ethan reached the top level and burst into the bell chamber. The church bell hung massive and black in the center of the room. Ancient. Covered in strange symbols carved deep into the metal. And wrapped around its base were hundreds of human fingernail scratches, like people had desperately clawed at it. The storm outside illuminated the town through broken tower windows, and Ethan finally saw Hollow Creek clearly. The forest was gone. In its place stood a gigantic crater spreading outward beneath the earth, and at the center of it, the well creature slowly pulled itself higher into the world. Ethan nearly stopped breathing. The thing was enormous. Its body stretched through the collapsed earth like a mass grave come alive. Human torsos fused together endlessly beneath pale flesh. Massive limbs dragged behind it while faces constantly formed and disappeared beneath its skin. And everywhere it moved, people followed. The transformed townsfolk wandered toward it slowly from every street in Marlow, smiling, offering themselves willingly. The creature's giant eye opened again, and locked onto Ethan inside the tower. Immediately every voice inside Ethan's head screamed at once. Pain exploded through his skull. He collapsed beside the bell, clutching his head. Then the voices began speaking clearly. We waited for you. You opened the door. You brought us back. Ethan screamed as memories suddenly flooded his mind. Not his memories, other people's. Missing people, lost travelers, the Walker family, the woman from Hollow Creek, all trapped inside the thing beneath the town, still conscious, still suffering. The bell beside him suddenly vibrated softly on its own, and another memory hit him. The church full of screaming people, fire, blood, the town trying to seal the creature underground, and a young woman volunteering to stay behind beside the bell. The same woman Ethan met in the woods. She had rung the bell while the tunnels collapsed beneath Hollow Creek, trapping herself underground with the creature. That's why she never fully changed. She was fighting it. Even now, a loud bang exploded beneath the staircase. Something was climbing toward Ethan rapidly. Wood splintered below. The voices returned instantly. Don't ring the bell. You'll trap them forever. You'll trap yourself too. Ethan looked out the tower window again. The creature had reached the edge of town now. Buildings collapsed around it, and among the shifting faces beneath its skin, Ethan saw Sheriff Briggs screaming silently for help, still alive inside it. The staircase below cracked violently. Twisted townspeople began climbing into the bell chamber. The eyeless man came first, smiling wider than ever. Behind him crawled Briggs, or what remained of him. Bones protruded beneath stretched flesh while black liquid dripped from his mouth. Briggs stared directly at Ethan, then whispered in his normal voice one final time. "Ring it." The creature outside suddenly opened its massive mouth toward the tower, and every light in Marlow went dark. End of Part 7. Part 8, The Last Siren. Darkness swallowed Marlow. The storm above the town raged violently as the creature outside the church tower lifted its enormous face toward Ethan, and smiled. Every face trapped beneath its flesh smiled with it. The twisted townspeople entering the bell chamber stopped moving suddenly, frozen, waiting, like puppets listening for instructions. Ethan stood beside the massive church bell, breathing hard while rain blasted through the broken tower windows. Below him, the creature's giant eye remained locked onto him without blinking. Then the voices returned inside his head, not screaming this time, begging, "Please, don't leave us here. It hurts." Ethan recognized some of the voices now. Sheriff Briggs, the woman from Hollow Creek, the missing family from the farmhouse photo, all trapped inside the well, still alive somehow. The eyeless man stepped closer slowly. "You can end it," he whispered. His jaw cracked unnaturally wider. "Or join us." Briggs crawled behind him across the floor, barely human anymore. Black veins pulsed beneath his skin while pieces of flesh hung loose from his arms. But his eyes looked clear for one final moment. "Ethan?" he whispered weakly. Then he looked at the bell, and nodded. Outside, the creature began climbing toward the church tower. The entire building shook beneath its weight. Massive pale limbs wrapped around the sides of nearby buildings as it dragged itself closer through the streets of Marlow. Car alarms screamed in the distance. Windows exploded outward. And all across town, the sirens suddenly stopped. Silence. The creature opened its enormous mouth toward the tower. Inside its throat, Ethan saw movement. People. Still moving beneath layers of flesh deep inside the thing's body. Trapped forever. The voices inside Ethan's head became desperate. "Ring it now." The eyeless man suddenly lunged. Ethan reacted instinctively and shoved him backward into the approaching crowd. Bodies crashed together violently. The chamber erupted into chaos. Twisted townspeople attacked Ethan from every direction. He grabbed a broken wooden beam from the floor and swung wildly as the tower shook harder. One creature slammed into him hard enough to send him crashing beside the bell rope. Below the tower, the well creature rose higher. Its giant eye widened, almost excited. Then Ethan noticed something carved into the metal beside the rope. A message. Deep scratch marks etched into the bell decades earlier. If the bell rings, the door closes again. But someone must stay. Ethan froze. The woman from Hollow Creek had known. She trapped herself underground to seal the creature. And now the well needed another keeper. Another sacrifice. The staircase suddenly collapsed behind him as the creature slammed into the church foundation below. The entire tower tilted violently. Twisted figures screamed as parts of the floor gave way beneath them. Rain poured into the chamber now. The bell swayed overhead. Ethan looked out toward Hollow Creek one final time. The entire town was sinking. Roads cracked apart. Buildings disappeared slowly into the earth around the massive crater beneath the forest. Marlow was dying. The voices inside the creature screamed louder. "Please, don't let it out." Then Ethan heard one final voice. "Soft, human. The woman from Hollow Creek. You can still save them." Ethan looked down. She stood in the street below the tower, somehow untouched by the chaos. Rain poured over her pale face. For the first time, she wasn't smiling. The creature noticed her too, and roared. The sound shattered every remaining church window instantly. The tower began collapsing. Ethan grabbed the bell rope tightly. The transformed townspeople rushed him together, and Ethan pulled. The bell rang once. The sound exploded across Marlow like thunder. Every creature in the tower screamed instantly. The giant well creature froze outside mid-motion. The earth beneath town trembled violently. Ethan pulled again. A second bell ring echoed across Hollow Creek. The crater began collapsing inward rapidly. Dark cracks spread beneath the creature's body. It screamed now, not in anger, Fear. Faces beneath its flesh began tearing apart desperately as thousands of trapped voices cried out together. The eyeless man grabbed Ethan's arm violently. "You're staying with us." Ethan kicked him backward and pulled the rope one final time. The third bell ring shook the entire town. Then everything beneath Marlow collapsed. The streets split apart. Buildings vanished into darkness. The massive well creature shrieked as the earth dragged it downward inch by inch back into the crater. The transformed townspeople screamed while being pulled toward Hollow Creek against their will. Even Briggs. He looked at Ethan one final time as the darkness beneath town swallowed him, and smiled weakly, thankful. The church tower began falling apart around Ethan. Wood snapped. Stone crumbled. The bell above him cracked loudly. And then Ethan saw her again. The woman from Hollow Creek standing in the doorway of the tower stairs. She reached toward him. "You don't have much time." The floor beneath Ethan collapsed suddenly. He fell hard against broken wood and stone as the tower gave way around him. Outside, the creature disappeared screaming into the earth below. Then silence. Complete silence. 3 days later, rescue crews arrived near what remained of Marlow. But there was no town anymore. Only a massive collapsed crater where Hollow Creek once stood. No bodies were ever recovered. No church. No bell tower. Nothing. The official report blamed a mining collapse and underground gas explosion. Most people believed it, except for one rescue worker. Because while searching the edge of the crater at night, he heard something deep underground. A distant siren. Then 3 slow knocks beneath the earth. End of part 8. And that was the final story from Marlow, the town that locked its doors before dark. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next horror story. Also comment below. Would you stay in Marlow for one night? Thanks for watching. And remember, if you ever hear 3 slow knocks outside your door after midnight, don't open it.